So we're continuing our look at the strategic planning process. We, in our previous video, evaluated the current performance of Tim Hortons, and we conducted an environmental scan. We can also look at projecting future trends. So where do we think the coffee and snack business or fast food business is going? Where is the growth opportunity? So we could project our future trends as well. We want to take this information and start to determine where our strengths and weaknesses are, where the opportunities and threats are, and how we can be competitive. So as we move towards that, we are going to look in this video at Porter's 5 forces. So Porter's 5 forces looks at 5 aspects in terms of the organization. It looks at the rivalries that we have, the threats of new entrants into the market, the threat of substitute products, and it looks at the bargaining power of our buyers and our suppliers. So let's look at each of these. So let's start with rivalry. Who are the competitors for Tim Hortons? So when it comes to Tim Hortons, right, you can get your coffee also at Starbucks, at McDonald's. We see that Tim Hortons is moving into making rice bowls. So now they're competing with quite a number of companies, including Subway just got into making rice bowls. So again, they're all trying to address that more healthy, health-conscious customer. So we look at the ability of customers to switch between. It's high, it's easy. Any day I could go to Tim Hortons or I could go to McDonald's and get a coffee. We can look at brand identity. So how are we doing in comparison? Well, Tim Hortons has quite a strong brand identity. We talked in a previous video about how it's seen as Canada. So if you are tied to that national culture, you might be going to Canada's brand instead of a competitor. We can look at differences between Tim Hortons and its rivalries. And so we might see that the rivalries like McDonald's offers more choice in terms of lunch and dinner. We can look at in terms of more fancy drinks, lattes, mochas, all these fancier drinks. Well, Starbucks has more. So all of these, of course, are leading Tim Hortons to offer more lunch and dinner options to compete with McDonald's, offering more of the fancier drinks to compete with Starbucks. So if we look at the industry concentration, right, there's a lot of competitors. Then we look at new entrants. Is it likely that new businesses will open up? Do those new businesses have brand identity? Are people likely to switch? How hard is it for someone to enter in? If we're simply looking at competition in terms of a coffee shop, the ability to open up a new coffee shop is not too complicated. The capital requirements, you need a coffee machine. They're not too onerous for people to join in. The government policies and restrictions in terms of opening up a coffee shop are not so prohibitive to keep people out. So there could be a number of new entrants. The learning curve, learning how to make coffee, the economies of scale. So economies of scale, the more you produce, the more your cost per unit goes down. There is a benefit if you provide more food options to be a bigger company than a smaller one, because you can buy your ingredients in bulk and your lettuce doesn't go bad before you're able to put it in a sandwich and sell it. So there are economies of scale when it comes to more of the lunch and dinner items that would lead to more bigger companies rather than a bunch of tiny pop-ups. But when it comes to things like coffee, where coffee beans last for a long time, you can be a successful company without having to be a big company. It's also not a proprietary process in terms of how you make coffee, how you make a latte. It's not that different from one business to another. Maybe you make some fancy decorations in your drinks, but otherwise it's not too difficult for new entrants to come in. So the risk to Tim Hortons is that anybody can really start a coffee shop. Where it's a little bit harder is in some of the other products. Okay. What about the substitutes? So if to get something different than your Tim Hortons donut, are there alternatives? So people are looking for places to eat breakfast. You could have a breakfast sandwich at Tim Hortons or McDonald's. You could have a sit-down breakfast at Cora's. So is there a buyer inclination to certain substitutes? Some of those substitutes are going to be more sit-down, higher scale, more money. And so Tim Hortons is more competing based on a lower price, faster service. And then we look at, how much variety is there? Well, as Tim Hortons gets into rice bowls and wraps, and that creates more and more substitutes for each individual product. So is their focus that they're a one-stop shop, that you can get every type of meal item in one location? So if you have a family of 6, everybody gets exactly what they want. But when you have more variety, it's much harder to maintain as a company. There's a lot more cost to keep all those ingredients, rather than simplifying and being higher quality in one particular area. So then the other things we need to look at is buyer power and supplier power. Now, if we were a company that we sold t-shirts that were sold at the Gap. So the Gap would be our buyer. So then there is a threat of backward integration. So maybe the Gap is going to buy us. That's the threat of backward integration. We also have to look at buyer power in terms of the price and negotiations, and how many other stores we might sell our t-shirts to. So what kind of buyer concentration is there? And what kind of volume do they buy? So if we're selling t-shirts, can we sell it to other places instead of the Gap? And if we sell just to the Gap, how much do they themselves buy? How much leverage do they have over us? The more they buy from us, the more that they are the only buyer from us, the more leverage they will have in terms of dictating the price that we sell our t-shirts for. So all of these come in terms of the buyer having influence over us. If we're Tim Hortons, then the buyer is the customer. And we have lots of customers, lots of small customers, not one big one. And so it comes down to things like buyer information. How aware are they of what we offer, what price we charge versus the competition? What incentives do they have to come buy from us? The other thing we have to consider is supplier power. So who do we get our materials from? So if we're Tim Hortons, where are we getting the donuts, the cookies, the coffee beans? How many different suppliers do we have? Do we buy a lot from a small number of companies? And do we have choice in terms of who we buy from? Who has the leverage in terms of setting the price for the coffee beans? And when the price of coffee beans changes, how much does that change the cost to our organization and our ability to sell the coffee for a certain price? So we look at the impact of inputs on our cost. We look at the impact of inputs on differentiation, so our ability to be different from the competitors and offer something that's not the same as them. So maybe we have pure Arabica bean, and we only serve Ely coffee. That would differentiate us from, say, a different company like Starbucks, which only does Starbucks coffee. And of course, the Starbucks coffee is roasted differently than, say, Ely coffee. So our suppliers who are providing us with those coffee beans, how much of an impact are they having on us? And then we look at the threat of forward integration, which is what's the ability of the supplier to buy us and take over our company. And so could the company that's providing our coffee beans buy out Tim Hortons? Those types of things. So here we have, just move my face a bit. We come back to our Porter's 5 forces. We are looking at the competitive rivalry, the threat of entry. So how easy is it to get more competitors? The threat of substitutes. So our customers could switch to something that's not quite a direct competitor, but something else. And then what's the bargaining power of our buyers and our suppliers? When we look at Porter's 5 forces, just as we end this discussion here, the Porter's 5 forces comes from a gentleman named Michael Porter. He's a management professor at Harvard. You'll actually see his name quite a bit in management and in marketing and in strategy because he's known for Porter's 5 forces, but he's also known for Porter's 4 generic strategies, which we'll talk in an upcoming video. And he's the one who coined the term value chain, which we will also talk about in a later video.